Hello, welcome to lesson 3 in vector graphics using Inkscape. This lesson is being created to help teachers and students that are following the National Centre for Computing Education's curriculum, but could actually be used by anybody who wants to just know a little bit more about vector graphics and Inkscape. If you have been following on our lessons, in our last lesson, lesson 2, we looked at how we aligned and distribute objects on the canvas. So have a quick read of the questions on here and think about what would happen if you were to align these shapes to the left edge relative to the page, and then second, what would happen to these shapes if you distributed the centers equidistantly vertically. Pause the video for a moment, have a little think about that, maybe do a sketch, and then play the video when you're ready to continue. Okay, so if all of the edges were aligned to the left of the page, they would look like this. You can see the left edges of the shapes are all aligned to the edge of the page, and then the centers of these three objects are equidistant vertically. Okay, what are we actually going to do today? We're going to look in this lesson at converting objects to paths, drawing paths, and then editing path nodes. And you can finish off by trying a series of challenges to create some different icons that will use the skills from the previous lessons and the skills you're going to learn today. Quick bit of the theory behind this. So when we're using Inkscape, when you're drawing things like rectangles and circles, you're creating what Inkscape calls as objects or shapes. But these are made up of paths and nodes in Inkscape. So you can see here where we have a polygon here, it's actually made up of a series of points to create that path. That obviously gives you object-specific properties, so if you wanted to change the number of sides on a polygon and things, that's nice and easy to do. But at times, you want to do a little bit more with the nodes, perhaps edit them and move them to different places and things. That's what we're going to look at first of all today. Okay, so switching over to Inkscape, let's just see what we're talking about here. Let's imagine we have a shape, a rectangle shape that we've created here, and we know that from previous lessons that a rectangle has its own properties, such as we can change the roundedness of the corners, or other shapes we can change things like the number of sides, etc. to them. But there comes times when we maybe want to not just change all of the corners' roundedness, maybe we want to only change one of them, or perhaps do something a little bit more radical and completely change the shape of this. Well, let's have a little look at how we could do that. So what we're first going to do is we're going to turn this object into a path. And what that does is it creates something for us here where we can see when we click to get the object specific things with a double click. Now what we have, instead of the white dots that we had before that were object specific, what we're seeing here is a series of grey, what we call nodes, and each of these nodes make up the path. So we've got a straight line, a curve, straight line, curve, straight line, curve, straight line, curve that made up the shape that we were working with. But now each of these nodes we can treat individually. So for example, we can change the position of a node. But we can also do things like change the element, the size of the curves in the nodes to make a completely brand new sort of shapes out of what we started with. When would that maybe be useful? Well, let's consider a different sort of series of shapes. If I was to maybe draw these two shapes like so, and let's just change the fill of these just for a second so I can give you an example of when you might want to do something like this. I've got two ellipses here now, but I want to do something with those. First of all, I'm just going to combine those into a union. And you'll notice when I do that, I obviously no longer have two ellipses. What I've actually ended up with now is a series of separate kind of nodes. Okay, so rather than going to the path and object to path, when I did the union of that, it automatically turned it into a series of paths. Why would I maybe want to do that? Well, maybe you can guess what I was trying to draw there when I do something like that, to give you a little bit of an idea that you could make something useful out of those shapes. Let's have a look at another example. Let's have a polygon this time. So we've got a star polygon here, and obviously when we have the shape-specific things, we can go and change the number of sides, or in this case, if we want to, we could sort of change the spikiness of the corners and things here and turn them around a little bit. But whatever I change is affecting all of them. What if I wanted to just change one or more of the spikes? Well, in that case, when we now go back and we turn this object into a path, and I go back and I look at what would be the object-specific things, I now just see the grey nodes, and I can do something like this. Perhaps this is going to be a new design for a guitar or a spaceship or something that I'm creating here, like so. So what we've just seen is how we can take objects and convert them into paths, and then how we can sort of play around with the nodes to make some more interesting shapes. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video, go away and see if you can create some similar shapes to the ones we've just created here. If you're following along in a lesson, create the shapes that you've been asked to create and pop the screenshots of them into the A1 Objects to Path slide. Now we're going to have a look at, can we draw paths from scratch? So it's paths that aren't actually based off of objects like we have done already. There are different ways of doing this. One of them is using the freehand tool. So over here, draw a freehand line. And using this, you can literally just hold the mouse pointer down and you can start to sort of draw some shapes just with a freehand. Quite tough to do though, unless you're actually quite artistic and skilled in using the mouse. Shapes don't really end up very much like what you're trying to do, but what you can do is you can go in and edit them by moving all of the nodes. I personally find the freehand tool very, very difficult to use and don't use it very often. The second way of creating shapes is to use the line tool, and you can use this in two different ways. You can use it, one, to just draw straight lines, so we can draw a point to a point to a point to a point and back up there. I find that a lot more useful than the freehand one, and obviously you just end up with a small number of points on these, whereas when you're using the freehand tool, it's a kind of mess of a whole series of different points. Once if you close off paths like this, you can then you can use tools such as filling them or changing the stroke on them if you want to as well, like so. And then the other way is using the same tool that we use for straight lines, we can use to create curved lines. In this case, what you do is you click once, and when you click the second time, if you hold the mouse button down still, you'll see you get sort of some curved parts that you can sort of choose by moving these endpoints of what sort of shape you want that curve to be. And then you can go off and you can find another point, and again you can sort of choose the shapes that you want of these to make curves. Again, it does take a little bit of skill and a little bit of practice to get sort of good at doing things like this, but once you sort of practiced a little bit with it, you can certainly get better shapes than you could with the freehand tool, and once again you're able to still fill shapes and things in. Okay, why don't you go away now, pause this video and see if you can do a better job than I did of creating those shapes by spending a little bit of time on them. Once again, if you're following this along as part of a lesson, you'd want to pause the video and create your shapes, pop them onto the A2 slide for drawing of paths. Okay, so this last bit of skills that I'm going to try and teach you is how we can do a little bit more with the paths by editing the nodes that are in them. Let's see if we can show you an example of things, the kind of things we can do. I'm going to draw a rounded rectangle here, and if you just bear with me a minute, I'm going to do a few things. First of all, I'm going to duplicate this shape that I've just created, and then I am going to select it and go to the transform tools. I'm going to hold down the control key and I'm going to rotate it so I can see in the bottom that I've rotated it by 45 degrees, and I'm just going to do the same with the other shapes that we had. So I'm going to rotate that. I'm looking at the numbers in the bottom of the toolbar there, and it's 30. I want it to be 45 degrees. What I'm going to do now is use some other tools that we've used before. I'm going to say I want to create a union out of these shapes. And now when we start to look at this, you can see I've got all these other nodes that I can play with, but hopefully it's going to allow me to do something that I'd like to do. What I want to do is go in and start clicking on some of these nodes and see what happens when we delete them. So you're going to see lots of, by simplifying this quite a bit, what I can start to do is then grab sort of parts of it. There's another one here I think I need to delete. And we're about there. Maybe delete another one there. Start to sort of pull these curves around a bit better now to make sort of shapes that I'm after. And we can just keep deleting nodes if we're not happy with what we're getting until we start to get shapes that match maybe what I'm after, like so. Okay, why don't you go away and see if you can play around with the adding and deleting of nodes and just see what you can do with them like I did there to see if you can create this shape. So again, you can pause the video, create the shapes, pop them into your workbook and then press play again to see the next phase. Yeah, so a quick recap on the things that we've done so far. So we've looked at how we can convert objects into paths, and then how we can move and change these paths to make some different kind of shapes. Then we had a little look at how you can draw your own paths using the freehand, the line and the curves tools. Not sure I'd recommend the freehand tool. And finally, we've looked at how we can sort of edit the paths once we've created things. And in this case, we combined some shapes and then went in and deleted and edited some of the nodes to make a desired image, which turned out a bit better than the ones I was having a go at earlier. Okay, now it's your turn. There's two sets of icons here. Using the skills you've learnt today and in the previous lessons, see how many of these you can create. There's a variety of difficulties in them, so have a look at them, and if they're sort of jumping out at how you might create them, obviously some of them are simple here, but some of these are a little bit more complex to kind of do, and particularly on the second set as well. Okay, good luck, and I hope you enjoyed playing around with Inkscape.